Hello, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. If you have any questions as we're going, just feel free to type them into the chat box and we'll post them at the end. So we're just going to start with introductions. This is Liza Duchesneau talking. I'm at the Center for Housing and Health.
Hi everyone, this is Anna Carvlin with the HMIS team at All Chicago.
Hi everyone, this is Ben Darby at the Center for Housing and Health.
So today we're just going to cover some background information about how we went about creating the new coordinated entry assessment, the kind of process that we went through, why we're doing this in the first place, what exactly has changed on the assessment, and then Anna's going to walk us through what it looks like in HMIS, and then just some important reminders and next steps to keep in mind as you continue completing assessments.
Okay. We wanted to provide a little background on why we decided to refine the assessment. We received a lot of feedback that the current assessment is time consuming, a lot of questions are duplicative, and that there is some confusion about who's actually eligible for the assessment. Additionally, the last revision of the housing assessment was completed in March of 2018, so a while ago. Some updates were needed because some of the questions are no longer used for matching, so there's some questions we could get rid of there. In 2020, we're going to be moving towards a phased assessment process where only eligible households will be assessed for housing and others will be diverted to an appropriate resource.
So the way that we came to the new assessment that is much shorter, takes out some questions. We had a lot of voices in the mix to come to this new assessment. So that included 2 focus groups with skilled assessors who gave some great feedback. 2 focus groups with folks with lived experience. So that was at 2 different shelters, one at the north side and one in the south side. And then we also held an informational webinar, which many of you joined us for in November. And then since then, we've gotten a lot of feedback on the assessment just through email and phone calls. So that's been really great as well. All of this feedback has been incorporated into the assessment if we were able. We do have a document with all of that feedback kind of outlined, things that we were able to incorporate this time, things that we weren't, either because it just takes some more collaboration or because it was HUD restricted, so we couldn't incorporate all of the feedback. But the document is not attached to the webinar right now. We will send it out as a follow-up to everyone in addition to the actual paper copy of the assessment itself. So we really appreciate everyone that participated in the webinar and the skilled assessor focus groups who gave us their feedback in person, and then everyone that sent in their feedback and questions and suggestions over the last few weeks. It's been super helpful to understand how to make the assessment work better for the community. Some things that you all have given us feedback about that are actually incorporated into the assessment are the addition of a field for adding preferred pronouns and preferred name. The assessment is much shorter, an attempt to avoid duplication when we could, and rearrangement of questions to help the flow of the assessment. And these are all things that you'll see soon when Anna walks us through the HMIS version.
So we want to go through some of the changes section by section. So the first one is what's changed. In the current housing assessment, we didn't have a good tool to screen for clients for eligibility. Without this, a lot of people doing assessments would often find that someone was ineligible to be assessed after the housing assessment had been partially or completely filled out. So we added a screener at the beginning of the assessment, the new assessment, with the goal of only assessing people who are eligible to be assessed, so that we don't waste their time and we don't waste your time. And so we can divert clients who aren't eligible to the necessary and relevant resources. So this allowed us to get rid of 5 diversion questions within the assessment. The screener will appear in the assessment, and Anna will take us through this in a little bit, as a question at the very beginning that asks whether or not you've used the pre-screener, and then there'll be a link, and you need to copy that URL or that link into your browser to open up the eligibility screener. So also, as you'll see in the new assessment, we also moved the safety questions from the bottom of the assessment to the first page directly after the pre-screener. We've done this because we want to make sure that clients fleeing domestic violence or human trafficking are being assessed through CES. This way, if a client appears ineligible to be assessed based on the pre-screener, if they're not literally homeless, they're also asked if they're fleeing domestic violence or human trafficking, which would make them eligible to be assessed and matched to resources. So even if they're not experiencing literal homelessness. So all households should answer these questions. So yeah, so that's the what's changed with eligibility screening. So next, what's changed with the contact information. So we've added a couple questions. One was, as Liza talked about earlier, alias and preferred name, and the other is a question that asks what are your pronouns.
I think this.
Yeah. So in the veterans section, we removed a couple questions and added one question. So we removed the question on eligibility for veteran healthcare because it's self-report, and it hasn't been super helpful for us to match to HUD-VASH resources, so we took it out. We also removed type of permanent housing intervention offered, because assessors who are not SSVF grantees always select others, so it was also not super helpful. And we added information on the CRC and the veterans hotline to the assessment, as well as the main point of contact for veterans for CES, for contact information into the assessment as well.
Okay, now it's my turn. So we changed a lot within the housing and homelessness section. We removed a handful of questions. We removed 4 follow-up questions about the applicant's length of stay in transitional housing, residential facilities, or housing that was meant to help determine eligibility. So all those caveats to literal homelessness, you know, if someone has stayed in jail for less than 90 days, those types of questions, those ones were removed because they can be captured in the eligibility pre-screener. So that information is information the assessor should know before moving forward with the assessment to determine whether someone is actually eligible for coordinated entry. Additionally, we decided that there only needed to be one category for youth ages 18 to 24, and that is age 18 to 24 and unstably housed. So we took out that category and determined that the category that would stay is at risk of homelessness. So everyone assessing youth will select at risk of homelessness, and that will be enough information to identify youth for youth transitional housing. So this has a lot to do with the rollout of diversion as well. So the people that will be actually assessing youth will be youth providers who will be trained in understanding these different categories for youth. And then the Catholic Charities diversion call center. So the folks that are doing assessments with youth will have a clear understanding of what all of this means, and other assessors will just select at risk of homelessness and then call diversion, the youth diversion hotline with the youth that's in front of them. And then we converted the question on whether a family is unsheltered and staying with children into a note asking that if that is the case, that the assessor please call 311 as there is shelter available for families who are unsheltered with children. In terms of income and education, that was asked to match people to a specific program that no longer requires the same eligibility criteria. So we did remove that question. The question on whether an applicant is worried about income affecting their benefits or housing, that was collected for research purposes and wasn't used for matching, so we took it out. And then we also took out the timeline of when people would be connected to employment resources. That was because of some skilled assessor feedback. The employment services that are being offered have limited capacity, and so it didn't make sense to ask for a timeline of contact when that really wasn't available. Over to you, Kelly.
Okay. So we're going to go through a little more than this, but the pre-screener, contact info, veteran section, housing and homelessness, and income and education. And I'm assuming most of the people on the call are skilled assessors, so I will get into the weeds a little bit, and this will be sort of like a repeat training for you, but it can't hurt to go through some of this again. So if you're not an assessor, you'll just be seeing the assessment as it is on HMIS. And a couple of things to note, what I like to do when I am sitting down with a client is to have all of these reference articles open. So I've got several reference articles that are all on our help desk. So if I were you, I would go to the hmis.allchicago.org help desk in order to favorite this page. And then you can look in the coordinated entry section down here and explore this section and look at all the articles. There are a few things that we need to update because we just now updated the coordinated entry assessment. But we're going to be updating this, but there's still a lot of definitely relevant current articles. So a couple of things I would have open are the CES eligibility pre-screener. This is new. The information isn't new, but this is new, and we want you to be familiar with the information on here before you open up an assessment. I would have the client consent and supplemental ROI. Before you go into HMIS to create a client record, you should know whether or not the client is willing to share their information, and if they do not agree to share any information, you'll never open up a client assessment for coordinated entry. Housing history tool, I would have this open because it tells you the correct way to complete a housing history tool. Leave the end date empty. All of the types of places are complete. There's no future dates here, and there's descriptions where it's relevant. I'll go through that in the assessment. And then the youth eligibility for assessment too, you might want to review that. And when I'm sitting down with a client, so first what I'm going to do is determine their eligibility, and then I'm going to determine whether or not they want to share their information. So first I want to see, are they staying in emergency shelter or a place not meant for habitation? Definitely go ahead and complete the assessment with this client unless they've chosen option C, they don't want to share their information. Were they in jail or prison and they exited today, and were they there for less than 90 days and prior to that they were in a place not meant for habitation? You can continue if that's the case. If they're in a healthcare facility, again, caveats to that. And if they're unstably housed, again, caveats to that. So you'll want to review this and know this information by heart. For the moment, you can have this open to refer to it. we've determined that our client is in a car, and so she has agreed to share her information. She chose option A. And again, so she chose option A. We are going to go ahead and create the client record because, well, first we're going to see if the client's in the system. And then we're going to create a client record, and then we're going to enter them into the project. So the very first thing as a skilled assessor that I need to do, for 90% of skilled assessors, I should say, if you're the 10% that your only project is coordinated entry, then you won't ever have to enter data as. But if you are part of other projects like an emergency shelter, you'll need to enter data as a skilled assessor. So you can kind of fill in the blank, enter data as a skilled assessor. But if your only job is a skilled assessor, you don't have to do that. So we're going to enter data as, you should only have a couple options here, but you can find the correct project. And now I'm in enter data as mode. So I can always check up here if I'm not sure. We're going to want to head over to client point to see if our client is in the system. And let's see, we've got, actually this Jade is Jade Toyota. Let's see, actually we're going to clear this out here. Jade Toyota. We're going to search for the client. I do not see a client that pops up. I've checked different spellings. I've checked to make sure the client is sure they're not in the system. I definitely don't want to add a duplicate client record. If the client insists that they're in the system and they're sure of it, and for some reason you just can't find it and they have a locked file, then you would go ahead and create a paper assessment and then let us know, hmis@allchicago.org, that you have to unlock their file. So just, you can complete the paper assessment, which actually, because we just changed this 2 days ago, it's outdated, we need to update this. We will do that very soon. So we're looking for Jade Toyota. She's not in the system. We're going to add Jade Toyota, and she's given us her full name. And this alias, we can optionally fill that out if it's available. Fill out the Social Security if you have it. And fill out whether or not they're a veteran. All right here. You can do that a little later in their client profile, but preferably you would do it right here because we need that information. You're always going to pick this middle option, add new client with household. And then this is a female with child. Again, go ahead and continue. We've got all their client record information. The one thing you're going to need to change here is that they are the head of household. You will never be assessing somebody who is not the head of household. Now you've got the household information, and then you're not going to need to add children here because we're going to add the children information in the actual assessment. The other thing is you have completed the client consent and you completed a paper copy, so that needs to stay somewhere. You're welcome to scan it and upload it to the client profile. So what you would do is you'd head over to the client profile, scroll down to add new file attachment, choose file, and just pretend that's a client consent form and name it. That's not required, but it is a good idea because we want to have their consent on record. What you don't need to do is come over here and complete the ROI like you would normally for other projects. So you don't need to do this. We do need you to do the paper copy, and we do need you to indicate their consent in the assessment itself. So now we're ready to enter them into coordinated entry. I always double check I'm in the correct EDA mode. We're going to add entry. This auto populates to the 1474, and then we're going to do HUD entry. You would backdate this if you had done a paper copy 2 days ago and then are inputting it today. Otherwise, just leave this. And then if she had 3 kids listed here, let's say this client record was pre-existing in the system, and she had her 3 kids listed here, you would only keep her checked. Don't check the kids too. Now we save and continue. So there's lots of things here. This diversion prescreener, you will have been specifically trained on that. That's for dedicated assessors right now. The standardized housing assessment is what you're going to be looking at, and you'll also look at the VI disability, vulnerability index, and disability. So Jade Toyota is a woman. She's got 3 kids. She's living in her car. I did already complete the eligibility assessment here, and so I'm going to click yes. We put this question in here so that you can just double check that you're making sure to assess people that need to be assessed, because we've gotten a lot of people that don't actually need to be in the coordinated entry project. So we want to make sure people are actually homeless or fleeing domestic violence. So you're going to have to copy this URL. We can't add a hyperlink in this system. And I already had it open over here, but just to double check your work. So yes, we already did the pre-eligibility. We completed the consent and we already uploaded it. So the individual did complete the consent. We wouldn't be in this system if they didn't choose A or B. So we're good. They chose A. We actually find out that they have had a history of domestic violence, so we're going to actually just pick B. Even if they picked A, we're going to pick B because they have a history of domestic violence. So we're going to later lock the file. You don't need to do the assessment attempts. This is for people who may not have their full faculties and are not able to complete the assessment with you, and so they may need an observational assessment. So if you're not able to complete the assessment, you would just document that here. These are new safety questions. I'll let you read through these on your own, and then there are some resources listed here for DV and human trafficking. So you should not, we've already talked about continuing or stopping. This is just another reminder. We don't want people completing the assessment if they're not homeless. You're going to completely fill out your entire first, last name, location, etc., etc. We want to know all of your information, and then if a previous assessor's information is in here, we want you to overwrite it. We want you to delete it and write your own information in. This is the client contact information, and we need that information completely filled out. If you have an alias, great, put it in here. That's a different field from that initial client profile field. So if you typed it in there, you're going to have to retype it in here. This relationship is always self. We said that Jade chose female and that she prefers she, her, hers pronouns. Primary race and ethnicity, we want to get that down as well. And we're just going to say that Jade was born in 1980. So again, fill out all of the contact information as much as you can, information on social services, and then alternative contact information as well. Anything that can help us find them if they get matched to housing. So that's why there's all this notes that you can add as well. We'll refer to that if we're trying to find the client later. Are they a veteran? If you don't know the veteran definition, you can hover here. You can also click and then just read through the definition. We've determined Jade is not a veteran. And so these questions are no, we're not going to complete the other veteran information. If you ever have questions about veterans, you can email jessica.smith@csh.org. The housing history situation and information is really important. We want to understand this housing history because it determines their chronic status, it determines their length of time homeless. So this whole section, including this length of homelessness, this whole section is really important. We've determined that Jade's situation is Category 1 homeless. She has a history of DV, but she's not fleeing domestic violence. If this were to be a youth and they were at risk of homelessness, you could choose at risk. And then just be sure to understand the youth eligibility for assessment and whether or not they could possibly be diverted. You'd want to work that out as well. Category 1 homeless, prior living situation is where did they sleep last night? Place not meant for habitation. Length of stay in previous place is 1 week or more, but less than a month. We're saying it's about 28 days. However, Jade stayed in the car for 28 days, but then she had a week where she was on the street. And so we're going to say she was on the street, and so that was actually 11/8/2019 is when her approximate date homelessness started. Now, a while back, even further back, Jade was in an emergency shelter earlier in 2019. But that's not when we're going to start this question. We're not going to use that date for this question because she had an interruption of more than 7 days. So she had stayed at a shelter in August. But between that and the time she was on the street, she was at a friend's house for 2 months. So if she was at her friend's house for 6 days, we would look at that time period for the start of homelessness, but because she was there for 2 months, we're only looking back at this current situation, and we're looking at all the current situations combined, current homeless locations. As long as she's been homeless, we're looking at that cumulative situation, and that's 11/8, since it's about a month and a week. Regardless of where they stayed last night, number of times the client has been on the streets, in emergency shelter, or safe haven in the past 3 years, including today, is 2. Total number of months homeless, on the street, in emergency shelter, or safe haven in the past 3 years, we're going to say 2. Because technically it's about a month and 3 weeks. But this current situation is 1 month and 1 week. And so we can count that partial week for this current situation as a month. But you cannot look back in time at a situation a long time ago that was 2 weeks and call that a month. So it gets a little tricky when you're looking at this question, but just understand that you can only count the current situation as a full month if it's a partial month. So let's just say it's 1 week or 1 month and 1 week. You can only count that current situation as a full month. Where does the client typically stay? We're trying to get at their unsheltered status or their sheltered status. So we want to get a sense of where they are. The client typically stays, we're looking at their quote prior living situation and where did they sleep last night. So in this current client scenario, we are pretending that this person stayed on the street last night or in a car last night and also is going to stay in a car tonight. I'm an outreach worker for this purposes. And so we're referring to this question when we're asking about the typical situation. And so, yes, because she has been staying there for more than 3 weeks. So we're calling typical about 3 weeks. And then because this is a place not meant for habitation, we want to be clear on what's going on. So it's a car. That's where she's sleeping. The next two questions don't apply to us, and if there's more information, please add it here. She does have 3 kids and they're with her, so yes, we want to answer yes to that question. For the length of homelessness, we really want to get this housing history tool correct, so we're looking at the past 5-year time frame, housed or unhoused, and then we want the start date of one location to equal the end date of the other location. So let's start with that. So what we're looking at, the other thing to note about this, if the person has, for example, this current instance that you're meeting with them, they have been for the past year living in a CTA, on the street, in a car, you know, all kinds of places outside. You can feel free to clump that all into one instance as long as it's the same. It's a place not meant for human habitation outside. And so outside or on the CTA or in a car. So you can feel free to not add 100 entries into the housing history tool and just try to gauge when the person was homeless and when they were in a shelter and when they were not homeless at all. That's what we're trying to get at. So for this person, for this situation, I am going to actually break up this past month and a week to show that they were in a car and also on the street. It won't be terrible if you decided to clump those two things together, but for the sake of this, we're going to separate it. So the start date for that situation was 11/15, and we're not going to put an end date because it's the current situation. This is a place unfit for habitation because it's a car. If you have more details, add them here. And then we're going to add another situation. Just remember this 11/15. That'll be the end date of the next situation. So the next situation is only about a week. And we're calling that 11/8. And then the end date is this 11/15. And then this is also was a place not meant for habitation because it was on the street. And if you have details, let us know. So let's remember this 11/8 because it'll be the same as the end date for the next situation. The start date for that situation is 9/8 and the end date was 11/8. Did I say remember the 11/15? I meant 11. Remember the end date is equal to the next start date. So 11/8. And this was actually with a family or friend. She was staying with a friend for a little while, for 2 months. And so let's remember the start date is 9/8. We're going to add another situation. This is tricky to do if you didn't write it down on a piece of paper first. So you might want to do that unless the person just has a pretty clear history. And the start date was 8/25. So about 2 weeks. They were in a shelter. So it is a homeless situation. And then we're just going to add one more situation, which is they lived in their own apartment or house for quite a long time. And the start date of that was 2014. And then the end date was the same as the start date of the last situation we put in. And we just want to make sure to go back about 5 years, so we don't have to add anything prior to this. So once I'm done, I just want to make sure everything looks correct. This equals this, this equals this, this equals this, and this equals this. Even if you have to gauge a little bit and fudge it just a little bit, try to get these equal, just so we know that there's not any major gaps. The most important is that you're documenting the homeless scenarios, but we definitely want to have you fill this type of place out. And if you don't complete it, I will email you. Please be sure to get this one correct. If you accidentally went into create a project entry into coordinated entry and forgot to click enter data as, and you entered this whole assessment as under your own project, you're actually going to have to go in and delete all of these instances under your own project and then come back in and enter data as mode to redo the entire assessment, including the housing history tool, because we don't want these duplicated in our account on the end on the one list. So the current situation is, where are you going to sleep tonight? And we know that this person is going to sleep still in her car. We didn't figure out a solution for her at the moment. We don't have to verify the situation right now. And then if you have any other details, just go ahead and add that. You'll never press save and add another. You just save. We want to know if the person has justice involvement in their history. And then, by the way, I should mention, if this current living situation will be different than the prior living situation if tonight this person's going to stay in a shelter or something somewhere else. So if the person came into the shelter and that's why they're getting assessed, and tonight they're going to stay in the shelter, go ahead and change that to their current situation. So when the person's situation isn't changing, this current and the prior are going to stay the same. Housing details. So we definitely want to know the household size. We've got 4, 1 adult, 3 kids. And then please complete the entire list of children. We want to know where people are willing to live and where they're not willing to live, and their income and education, AMI, and you can read through these questions in detail. We'll need you to complete the VI and then document any information. Where I put the consent, you can also include any documentation that you think might be useful there. Housing providers will be able to access that later when they're matched to housing. So you're done with the assessment. You want to go up here to VI disability and the vulnerability index and disability. We want to know, did the individual complete the HMIS supplemental client consent for sharing of certain disability and data information? Yes, they did. They did not decline to share their information. And the client does have a disability. We learned that she is dealing with bipolar disorder. And you can complete the type of disability as well. So we have this question 3 different times, the exact wording, because people can have all kinds of co-occurring situations. We only know of one for this person. And once we're done with that, we're going to add the family vulnerability index because she's a family. And I'll let you read through those questions yourself. We decided that she's not underreporting her disability, and that we don't think, we think that they've had their full faculties. Although they do have a severe mental health condition, it's not affecting their ability to, excuse me. Sorry, so the client has a severe mental health condition and awareness of this condition. We're saying that this person has bipolar disorder, and for our purposes, this person has been semi-functional and able to function. And so we're going to say that they don't have a severe mental health condition. We're done with the assessment. We learned that the client has a history of domestic violence, so we're going to lock the record by clicking this green button up here, the little lock symbol, and delete the global. You're also able to add a visibility group if you have access to a project. So sometimes you'll be able to do this. You can add this so that when you look for the client record in your other project, you'll be able to do that once you've left the EDA mode. The client comes back a little later. They have some more information for you. You're going to add an interim update over here. Save and continue, and then let's just say the client has perhaps changed their phone number or added some new information about that. All of these little bars, you should be able to look and see what the history is here for most of the questions that have been completed. So we've added an update. You'll only ever go through the interim update to add information. The caveat to that is if you had to correct something once you completed an assessment, you could just go in here. But for the most part, I would say 99.9% of the time, you're going to change information via the interim update. So we've locked the assessment, we've added the entry, we've updated the client's consent form to the client profile, we've updated any other documents that might be relevant for the final provider. We are done adding this client record. Thank you very much, and I look forward to working with you. So I'm going to go back to the slides, and just as a reminder for the let's see, where are the reminders? Okay, hang on. So yeah, a couple of things just to remember is making sure to go into EDA mode because that will affect the client's ability to get housed. Making sure the client is actually homeless before you open a client record, create an entry into a project. Make sure that you are answering the homelessness questions and the length of time homeless questions correctly. If you don't complete the housing history tool at all, the client just won't even be looked at for housing. It's the way we're doing prioritization. So you have to complete an assessment and you have to fill out that housing history tool. We really need to know the correct, disability status. Sometimes there's discrepancies within a record. We need to know as much as you can figure out the correct information about that. And trying to think what else, but yeah, just getting all of the information as correct as possible is good. So I'm going to pass it off to my colleagues.
Anna. Yeah, sorry about the reminders slide. I think, I don't know if you mentioned this, but to never exit a client from coordinated entry.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That is something that All Chicago will take care of if someone becomes inactive on the one list, but not something that skilled assessors need to worry about.
Yeah. And, go ahead. Just attaching kids is another thing. Don't attach the kids when you do an entry. But yeah, the exiting, I've seen a couple, a lot of times it seems to be an accident, but a lot of times it does seem like people are exiting out clients from coordinated entry. Don't want to do that. Just email us and let us know if you think the client is housed. We want to know that, but just email HMIS@allchicago and we can do the exit.
So I had a couple of other little things as well. The housing provider can see the assessment. So there are two reminders I just want to throw out there in terms of that. The first is that when you are entering information into the assessment, be as detailed as you can with the housing history tool to help when the client gets matched to housing. It can help client's memory when they're sitting with the housing provider who can view the housing history tool right in front of them. But with that, if you're adding notes or anything, make sure you don't put any information about the person's diagnosis in the assessment itself. Since it can be viewed by a housing provider, we only want information in there that pertains to their housing. The other thing I wanted to just remind you all is that when you're filling out any military or veteran information in the assessment, make sure that it aligns with the information that's in the client profile. So if you put that someone has a veteran status in the assessment, make sure that it also reflects that information in the client profile if that's what the person just told you. And vice versa, if you're doing an entry into your program, just do a couple of clicks to make sure that the information is the same with their veteran status in the assessment as well.
And after the webinar, we'll send out the paper version of the assessment, and with that, we'll send out these reminder slides and some information on that because we forgot to put it in the slide deck here.
Yep. And then you guys have if you guys want to take the next few slides, I think I gave you the mouse. There you go.
Yeah, so I think we might have already touched on these things, but making sure that any updates that you complete in the assessment is through an interim update, and to overwrite information when you do those interim updates so that the most recent information is what's pulled for the match. And then we'll go over some next steps.
So the assessment is going to go live in HMIS this afternoon. If you'd like access to the HMIS training site to practice, just email Anna for login information.
We're working on some updated handouts to give to clients. We'll have a handout that's available for clients who are eligible for coordinated entry and complete an assessment, and also one that is for folks who are not eligible for coordinated entry with some guides to other resources that might be available. If your agency completes assessments with folks and hands out some sort of handout that you all have created yourselves, it would be awesome if you could send a copy to us at the Center for Housing and Health. We would love to see what's already out there and see if we can make something that is useful for everyone across the board so that clients are getting the same information no matter where they go. And then we're also going to work on some guides for how to ask the questions that are in the assessment, some scripting, and update that language for you all as well. So that'll probably be early 2020 that all of those new support will be available.
And in 2020, we're going to be working on refining the vulnerability index based on community input. We don't have an exact timeline, but we're going to be working on it at the beginning of 2020 with a work group that will have lived experience folks as well as PSH providers, youth providers, families. So we'll be working on it. There'll be more details to come. Just wanted to say that here.
Yeah, let me see if there are questions.
And our contacts are in this slideshow, but we'll also send a follow-up. So if you have questions that come to you later on, feel free to send them.
Okay, are you saying that we should no longer be assessing youth? That's from Diane O'Connell.
Anna, could you bring us to the pre-screener?
Yeah.
So we're still going to be assessing youth. The pre-screener has some information about when you do encounter a youth. So part D, someone who is unstably housed or a youth who's experiencing homelessness. You should call the Catholic Charities diversion hotline or email them. For youth that arrive at access points or are visiting a youth provider, those folks will still complete the assessment if that assessor determines the youth to be eligible for coordinated entry. The only major change is with the categorization for determining unstably housed versus at risk of homelessness. And that was for the questions that were included in the youth sections were to determine who was eligible for transitional housing. And that information can be determined by the diversion specialist. So they'll be able to reach out to youth that are assessed.
Yeah, and it's the housing status question, right, Liza?
Yeah, yes.
So instead of, because this is the HUD defined question, and we used to have a question that our COC just created, and so we took that one out. So now you would say at risk of homelessness if it's a youth, and that person would have still been eligible to be assessed.
And as we start using this new assessment, we can offer more clarity around things that might be confusing. So we're still working out the kinks in diversion and trying to implement these sort of progressive assessment tools so that we're not assessing everyone we encounter who may not need the resources that coordinated entry offers. We know that youth are more frequently able to self-resolve if they are still in touch with family and have other resources available. So we're trying to put them in contact with those resources before moving forward with a full-on assessment for resources they may not even need.
Mm-hmm. So we've got a couple more questions. We've got about 8 minutes left on the webinar. Let's length of stay in previous length of stay. Okay, Dan, you have a specific question about, I'm not sure I understand your question. I'm gonna look at that one and I will get to you offline. Oh, somebody said our sound keeps coming on and off. Apologies. And then somebody put, can you explain the section again? That wasn't clear. I'm not sure which section you were referring to. That was Diane, so I will touch base with you after. Okay, here's one. If the night before a lady comes to our shelter, she was in jail for 95 days, but the night before she went to jail, she was sleeping outside, do we still assess her? So you guys can take that.
So the short answer is no. If the person has been in jail for 95 days, that does count as a break in their homelessness. If this person is someone that is being entered into a shelter that night, like let's say you work at Olive Branch and that person is coming to the shelter to stay that night, you can go ahead and assess them because they are homeless as they're entering the shelter that night. If you do complete the assessment and put that they, stayed in that situation last night, it will come up incorrectly in our system. So you could email HMIS to let them know. But given that new table that HUD just put in the assessment, the current situation, this might happen less because you're not asking necessarily, where did you sleep last night? It's the current situation. So you would put today's date for shelter. But if that person is coming out of jail into a house situation, then no, they are not considered really homeless and shouldn't be assessed.
Yeah, and I think I understand Diane's question because the way I had my client scenario was that she's still homeless and she's not going into any new situation as far as I could tell. So that's
Right.
where the current and the prior were the same. So that typically, that might not be the case for a lot of your clients. They might be coming into a shelter situation, which is where you encountered them to do the assessment or whatever. So the prior is where did you sleep, current is where will you sleep. Well, this client was just continually homeless, so there wasn't a difference, if that makes sense. Okay, so just to clarify, we're asking for where they are sleeping currently, not the night before they came to us. That was Rachel. Do you guys want to take that?
Can you say it one more time? Sorry.
So just to clarify, we are asking for where are they sleeping currently, not the night before they came to us. And I can answer that too.
Yeah, I mean, I think similarly to what Anna just said, oftentimes they're the same. I know when I've done assessments with folks, I usually say, where did you sleep last night? And that kind of get that their current situation. But if you are working at a shelter and that doesn't seem to capture their current house situation, then you can make the determination whether they're literally homeless based on where you know that they're going to stay tonight. If you're in a drop-in center and you don't know for a fact that they're going to stay in a homeless situation that night, I would err on the side of not entering them into the system. But if you are entering them into shelter to stay that night, then it's safe to say that they are facing literal homelessness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, I think there's this one question, I'm not sure what, okay, so Hannah, you were asking, is the housing history section in the black part of the veteran housing section are separate? Do you guys understand that question? I'm not sure. Hannah, you might have to get to us after about that. Yeah. I'm not sure, but I think I answered Diane's question, so I won't get to you offline. Is there any other questions in our last 3 minutes? Okay, so I think we're gonna post this online. Well, I probably won't use this audio and visual, but we're gonna redo the skilled assessor training. That will be up online. You guys can look at that anytime. But this, I think we'll post this webinar, right, for at least a period of time. So you can look at this again if you need to, or send it to people that weren't able to attend.
If you start completing assessments and there's anything really major that you see that should be corrected or that you don't understand, please don't hesitate to reach out to Ben or myself or Anna and let us know, and also continue to ask questions. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you. So like I said, this is gonna be live before I leave today. So by the time tomorrow, if you do an assessment, you'll have the new questions in the regular site. But if you need to just get in the training site to look at it and practice, you can. Otherwise, you'll see it tomorrow live. Okay, I think
Okay.
we're done. Oh,
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
all right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.